In the case of James Dale Richie, a serial killer terrorizing Anchorage, Alaska, only a few years back in 2016, his downfall was caused by a chance encounter with police as they tried to ask a quick question on the side of the road regarding a runaway suspect they were trailing. This fateful meeting would end in bloodshed and multiple deaths. However, it would end up solving a killing spree that had been stomping Anchorage detectives for months. James Dale Richie was born on November 4, 1976, and seemed to be leading an incredibly promising and fruitful life in the Wonder Park neighborhood of Anchorage, Alaska. During his teenage years, he attended East Anchorage High School and by every standard was a stellar student. As a teenager, James stood at a whopping 6 feet and 3 inches, making him prime athletic material and a star of both the basketball and football teams, where he played alongside other athletic students that would eventually turn pro. Not only did James excel when it came to sports and athleticism, but he was also a force to be reckoned with when it came to academics, always getting good grades and even scoring 1,200 on his SATs. James also had an enriching social life, especially when it came to his 2 best friends, Quincy and Bobby Thompson. The 3 were all very close, with Bobby later recounting that James would stay over at the Thompson house for days or weeks. Whenever James wanted to come over to the house, he came over, Bobby stated, even mentioning that their mother loved him like another son. With this evident academic and athletic skill, James was recruited to the West Virginia University football team immediately following high school in 1994. But tragically, what should have been a happy send-off to college and a chance at becoming a professional football player was overshadowed by a tragic shooting and killing of Quincy Thompson the day before James left for Virginia. According to Bobby, his contact and friendship with James slowly but surely began to dwindle after James left for college. And with his brother's death to grieve over, Bobby was hard-pressed to chase after a friend who seemingly didn't want anything to do with him. Despite how hard James had worked to achieve his spot on the WU football team, James dropped out after just 1 semester and returned home to Alaska. Here, his life began a steady downward spiral, where James quickly became involved in drug dealing and dogfighting. By 1995, over the course of the next decade, James would be in and out of police custody for a variety of offenses, all of which were drug-related. In 1995, he was arrested for an attempted home invasion, where he broke into someone's home with some plastic handcuffs and 2 handguns. However, he was thankfully caught and arrested before he could carry out his currently still unknown plan. James was released from prison in 2007, after which he purchased a Colt Python revolver, one that Anchorage authorities would later become very familiar with, and left it for safekeeping with a friend while James moved down to Broadway, Virginia, to be with his parents. James stayed in Virginia for quite some time, but had next to no run-ins with the law, and was looking to be an example of how criminals can be rehabilitated and go on to lead promising lives. Unfortunately, that would not last much longer. Spurred on by a breakup with his girlfriend, James moved back to his hometown of Anchorage in March of 2016, and reacquired the revolver he had left with a friend before moving to Airport Heights, demonstrating a level of self-awareness likely gained during his peaceful years in Virginia. James could likely sense himself slipping back into his darker criminal headspace, and reached out for professional mental health. According to the police, it's unknown the type of help he received, how far the treatment went, or whether or not he was ever diagnosed with any actual disorder. On July 3, 2016, just 5 months after moving back from Virginia, James shot and killed 20-year-old Brianna Foy and 41-year-old Jason Sr. early in the morning, leaving without taking much time to cover his tracks. The bodies were discovered near a Ship Creek bike path by a cyclist just before 8 o'clock a.m. Both Brianna and Jason led troubled, drug-filled lives, with Brianna suffering homelessness due to her substance abuse and Jason struggling to pay child support or help at all in his two daughters' lives due to his addictions. The police were quickly called to the scene and ruled the deaths a double homicide. On July 5, given the drug connection between the two victims, the police understandably assumed the murders had to do with some kind of drug transaction. However, the trail soon went cold. Less than a month later, on July 29, James shot 21-year-old Trevin Kendall Thompson numerous times, killing him as he rode his bike home from a late-night shift at work. Shortly before the murder, James had been spotted through a nearby window by three girls who later heard the repeated gunshots and witnessed James picking up Trevin's bike and riding it away from the scene. The girls called the police, who quickly arrived, finding Trevin barely holding on to life. However, he would succumb to his injuries not long after and die at the scene of the crime. While in police care, police were able to determine that Brianna and Jason were killed using the same gun that shot and killed Trevin. However, this raised more questions than it answered. It was assumed that Brianna and Jason were murdered in conjunction with some sort of drug-related incident. However, Trevin was a hard-working and honest man with no connection to Anchorage's drug scene. With eyewitness accounts from the three girls that had called the police, detectives were able to get a sketch of Trevin's killer and reached out to the public. This sketch was done well enough to heavily resemble James. In a twisted turn of fate, Trevin's father was Bobby Thompson, who would later be shocked to learn that the identity of his son's killer was a man he once considered a brother. It's currently unknown for sure whether or not James knew Trevin's identity when he killed him. However, it's unlikely that he would have recognized him after losing contact with Bobby all those years ago. It's also fairly unlikely that knowing his victim's identity would have stopped the vicious killer that was James Dale Richie. During the morning of August 28, 2016, James would strike once again, this time killing 34-year-old Kevin Turner and 25-year-old Breda Husson in Valley of the Moon Park. Police were called to the scene by a woman walking through the park that found Kevin's body under a pavilion, evidently full of bullet wounds. While investigating Kevin's body, the police also discovered Breda's bullet-laden body and were able to determine that not only were both victims killed by the same gun, but that they were killed by the same Colt Python that was responsible for Brianna, Jason, and Trevin. Realizing that they had a serial killer on their hands, the Anchorage Police Department put out a warning, advising against any citizens walking along park trails after dark or early in the morning, while the FBI even put out a $10,000 reward for any information that led to the Colt's arrest. Anchorage lived in fear of their gun-toting serial killer for another 3 months, with no sign of his reign of terror ending anytime soon, until a fateful encounter on November 12. The Anchorage police received a phone call around 4 o'clock in the morning on November 12, 2016, reporting that an unknown man had ordered a taxi, but refused to pay his cab fare after arriving at his destination, and made a break for it by jumping out of the taxi. Armed with the description of the man, 2 officers drove throughout the late-night streets of Anchorage in hopes of finding the man. The following events were all captured on the dash cam of Officer Co's cruiser, and were later released in part to the public. While driving, Officer Co noticed a tall man walking alone down the street, and attempted to pull up next to him and question him about the runaway suspect. However, the man completely ignored Officer Co and kept walking. Co turned on his lights and yelled out the window to the man, ordering him to stop, but was once again completely ignored. Determined to find out what was going on, Officer Co then followed the man across the street, pulled onto the curb, and used a megaphone to get the man's attention. Finally able to capture the man's attention, he turned around and showed his face, revealing himself to the officer, who was unaware that he was staring down James Dale Richie, who was out looking for blood. It's at this point that the chilling dash cam footage cuts off, as James then whipped out his Colt Python revolver and opened fire on the officer. However, he miraculously was able to jump out of his vehicle and shoot back at James. While Officer CO was rushed to the hospital, where he eventually made a full recovery, James Dale Richie was killed in the shootout. After his death, James's gun was sent to a forensic lab, where it was tied to the murders of Brianna, James Sr., Trevin, Kevin Turner, and Breda Husson. However, with James being dead, the police were obviously unable to decipher any possible motive or reasoning for James's killing spree.